How is the concept of masculinity misused by others to get you to do whatever they want? There's a few ways. Let's find out. Okay, so there's always this debate about what is masculinity, what is modern masculinity, what is toxic masculinity. It's very strange because you could just say, well, the sort of sum or the mean of the attributes that men tend to have. We could say cross-culturally, we could say throughout time, we could say in comparison to women. You know, we're looking at averages, obviously. We could say this is a masculine trait. Is it a trait more men tend to have than women, right? We're generally looking at character traits, though, not things like beards or muscle mass. And, you know, classically, it's things like courage, competence, these classic sort of masculine virtues. Cross-culturally, men would be respected, say, for courage everywhere. I could talk to an Ethiopian friend, a Japanese friend. I spent time in both those countries, and they would both respect a courageous person. So this was a manly virtue. Not to say women don't have courage, but it tends to be more for men. Cross-culturally and across time, you know, reading the Iliad or Victorian literature, it's respected. So we could say, okay, certain things are respected throughout time, across cultures. That would be a pretty good place to start if we were to say, what is masculinity? And then we just ask, what does that look like in this context, right? So if you're not, you know, fighting outside of Troy, courage may look a little bit different in the internet age. Maybe it's about speaking your mind, you know, despite, I don't know, the British government maybe putting you in jail for a YouTube channel, something like that. That might be my little display of courage compared to my, I don't know, granddad in D-Day. But yeah, in a minor way. So we've got to look at it contextually, but it's the same basic virtue. All right, but other people will, so it's actually fairly straightforward, but people will manipulate it and say, but a real man would do this. And if you're a man, you'd do this. Well, this is manly. And this has always been misused by several groups of people. One is men themselves. Another one is kind of governments, institutions. We can add corporations maybe to that. And then one is women. Okay, so it's either the collective, men and women. Triangle, look at that. Will abuse this concept of masculinity, essentially defining it in ways that are convenient for them. And you got to watch out for this because people will do this in the sort of micro level of just interacting on a daily basis as well as sort of big societal narratives. And so there was a poem written in World War I that basically took the piss out of the saying that it was right and proper to die for one's country. So governments have always had an interest in saying that manliness was about sacrificing for the state, dying on behalf of the state. Now, they're taking what may be, let's call it an organic virtue or a natural virtue of courage and channel it in a certain way. So it's not totally wrong because men are, I think, sacrificing courage and, you know, being able to fight, strength on some level. These are classic masculine virtues. They're directing it for their own end and maybe missing out another side of things like, you know, independence or freedom, balancing, sort of missing some of the balancing virtues of masculinity. So governments have long said masculinity is exactly what they want. And that might go into the kind of productivity of like a man is someone who works and provides. It's like, well, yeah, protection, we talked about provision, that is a classic masculine thing. But in the context of consumer culture, that can be misused, right? So a man is someone who buys lots of stuff. You'll see this in the manosphere. You'll see this with the Tates and all those kind of people saying the man is the one who's got the rich things, he's got the bling that makes you more manly. What color's your Bugatti? I walk everywhere, mate. I live in the center of a tourist town. I ain't got a car. Anyway, so that idea that money is masculine, you're just jealous if you say it isn't. Now, again, it's not that providing a certain amount of financial literacy, you know, that's competency in the modern era. Men are always rewarded for their competency. Courage is part of entrepreneurship. I mean, years ago, I did a big project. We took a huge risk. I was like 2 million in debt, which for me at the time was a huge amount of money. And all these people on my team had a job, like 30 people. I said, what's his job? What's her job? And I'd say, someone said, what's your job? I said, my job's being able to sleep at night, right? My job is to being able to actually be there in that much debt and still be okay. And regularly people would work for me, so I would not want to be in that position. So this, again, it's like competency, courage in that kind of sense. Anyway, little story aside. So I think consumer capitalism, consumer culture. Yes, thank you, Seagull. So consumer culture can say that masculinity is, you know, that which keeps the machine going. The other thing that's interesting is the state is essentially in competition for men for protection and provision and wants the monopoly on violence. So men are much better at violence than women, for better and for worse. And what this means is that, particularly in sort of peaceful times or when the state's trying to create conformity, it wants men to not be violent. It wants men to not be forceful even or powerful. Now, as civilizations decay, this increases. So civilizations happen in these cycles, strong men, hard times, blah, blah, blah. You've heard it all before. Now, in that situation, it's increasingly saying that masculinity isn't about traditional masculine virtues. In fact, that's toxic because it feels it no longer needs them. Now, if there's a war or any kind of crisis, people change their mind real fucking quick. I remember when COVID broke out, when it looked like it might be quite dangerous at the beginning, when we thought it might be worse than it really was. Some people still think that, but anyway, as an aside, I remember some women I knew commenting, like memes going around Facebook saying, remember when you thought you wanted a hipster boyfriend? It's like people saying, I want to protect her, I want to provide her. And that wasn't, a big threat, right? It's that little bit of threat and people immediately going there. Equally, I've worked in Ukraine, and in Ukraine, the women are quite open about loving masculine men, protectors, soldiers. I mean, it makes me cry, man. Like the female team that I work with of psychologists there will say, we love our men. We love how brave they are. We love that they protect us. Just huge gratitude there. Now, it's not the case for every Ukrainian woman, I'm sure. There's some ungrateful ones, but the ones I've met, they love traditional masculinity. And you'll see this as soon as a car breaks down, all of a sudden, people want traditional masculinity. As soon as there's a bill to be paid, people want that masculinity provider, right? You'll see people switch real quick into this mode. The state struggles because in the way it wants soldiers, it wants protectors, but it wants people that are masculine, make money, but it doesn't want any competition for its monopoly of violence. It wants to say it's the protector and the provider. So that's where you get this quite anti-male trend, particularly in like decadent, postmodern nation states that haven't had a war in a long time or any emergency in a long time. Western culture now. Okay, next group, women. Women will say masculinity is whatever's fucking convenient for them, right? So women will define masculinity as what is advantageous to them. Now, there's some truth in this because women have always chosen. Women choose men. Yeah, it's women that are the judge men. Women will pick the man who is successful. Now, it could be intra-male competition, right? But they'll pick the successful ones. And a certain degree of that is women actually deciding for themselves, what do we want? What is, in terms of pregnancy is expensive, sperm is cheap, right? So women are the ones who are choosing, assuming normal circumstances. That's why men do all the things we do, from, drive cars fast to win Nobel Prizes to invent civilization. We're trying to impress the girls. Yeah, it's good to get over that as you grow up. But women will define masculinity as is convenient for them. It's like, well, a real man would do it. A real man would pay for this. A real man would do that. And, I can buy into that to an extent, but there's a point where it becomes ridiculous. I used to date in Russia a lot, and oh my God, the manipulation from women there in terms of like how they treat men, how they define masculinity in a way that's absolutely convenient for them. So I think we don't need to get cynical here, but that is one. The average woman is just way more sort of socially competent than the average man her own age. Given sort of similar IQ, educations, whatever. And she will run rings around you if you do not get this. So this is really, really worth getting. Okay, the next one, men themselves. So men's competency can exist at different levels. We could think of it a bit spiritual, like different chakras, more physical people, more emotional, more cognitive, more spiritual. We all have our own calling, right? So my best mate, James, great bloke, he's good with his hands. He's a carpenter. Actually, he's a cabinet maker. Apparently that's totally different. But very practical guy, very practical guy. Another guy I can think of, he's a care worker. He's very sort of emotional. I tend to be more like verbal, cognitive, not the cleverest person ever, but I tend to earn my living with my mouth and my brain. Other people are more spiritual, and we're all a mix, obviously, but we've all got different strengths, different ways to be courageous, different ways to express masculinity. This is why we can look at the archetypes. Some people are more warrior, lover, sage. I'm a bit of a joker. Lots of ways to look at it. We all have our strengths. And, actually getting on stage and telling a joke, for example, is incredibly masculine because it's incredibly courageous. And to me, that's, in many ways, it's not equivalent. So we shouldn't say more or less, but it's certainly side by side. I certainly would say like that's that social courage of, say, a comedian or someone that stands up and says the unpopular thing, It's not the same as a soldier. Not the same as someone who's physically courageous. Or I used to work on farms and go out in all kinds of weather. It was hard, man. After a few summers doing that, like 1 or 2 winters, oh my God, you just go, I'm not up for this. See these hands? Farm hands. Still got mates in East Anglia who do that. And I just go, it's my East Anglian accent now, isn't it? When I go to that. And I just think, fucking hell, I ain't brave that way. Anyway, so what men will do to manipulate each other and to try and score sort of dominance points on each other is they'll say what they're good at is the real masculinity. Yeah. So you'll have men say, I know, unless you can fight, you're not a real man. I just think, okay, maybe we all need a basic competence there. Self-defense. I've done martial arts. It's a good thing. But is that the definition of masculinity? Particularly in the sort of modern era, because someone else might say, no, just be clever. That's more masculine. Then you can pay someone to fight for you. You can pay a bodyguard if you need to. I go, okay, something's maybe lost there, some basic competence. There's all these channels on YouTube about man skills. And it's like, my God, if I learn plumbing, electrics, cars, all that stuff, it's great. But does it define what's masculine, or are you just good at it? So men will manipulate each other. Men will try and get to the top of competence hierarchies. Men, particularly sort of men, will try and belittle each other on both levels, right? Your skills are too crude. Your skills are too refined. You're gay unless you know how to change a car tire. There's some silly things going around. All right. So where I think the grain of truth in that is having some competence at all these levels is good. I want to learn more about cars. I'm glad I can fight. There's things there that even though they're not my main thing, I even know, and glad I know, or I want to know at least a little bit about. Right, last up to finish here, some people just define masculinity as like good men are essentially women, right? Or the idea of good men is like, okay, we've got virtue and we've got masculinity. So it doesn't mean that it's masculine. They're just adding virtue to that. So let's take strength, masculine competency. You could be a virtuous, protective sort of knight archetype, or you could be a less virtuous brigand, robber, mugging people, whatever. But they're still both got strength and courage. Or there'll be an attempt to sort of say, well, the real courage is the courage to be vulnerable about your emotions. Yeah, there's a bit of truth in that. That's one level of courage. But usually they're just trying to flip it, trying to say that actually what defines a man is being the same as a woman. That's actually just an attempt to get rid of masculinity. A lot of the people who are talking about toxic masculinity don't actually have a non-toxic version. And this is a good test. If someone says, it's toxic masculinity, ask them, what's a non-toxic man? What is non-toxic masculinity? And if they can't answer, or their answer's the same as a woman, it's exactly the same, or it's just virtue generally, like one of those answers, quite common, you'll see on like the BBC or something, right? Then they don't love men, they hate men, they want to get rid of men, they don't like the idea of masculinity at all. So that's definitely a red flag. Okay, so there we go. How do people define masculinity in ways that are at their advantage, not yours? Get wise about this stuff.